This afternoon's speaker is Shana White, Director of CS Equity Initiatives at the Kapor Foundation. Shana V. White is the Director of Computer Science Equity Initiatives at the Kapor Foundation. In this role, she leads efforts to promote equitable CS education, supporting initiatives such as CS for CA and CS for GA, and collaborates with stakeholders in Georgia to enhance teacher professional development and increase participation and success for students of color in K12 CS courses. With 16 years of experience in K12 education, Shana has served as a teacher and an instructional technology specialist in both public and private schools in Metro Atlanta. She is passionate about disrupting the status quo, connecting and creating communities for educators online, and is committed to racial justice and equity in K-12 schools. Shana holds a BS from Wake Forest University, an MS from Winthrop University, and an ed specialist degree from Kennesaw State University. Outside of work, she enjoys spending time with her family, watching live sports, volunteering, watching romantic comedies, and lifting weights. This afternoon, Shane is going to talk to us about co-creating AI classroom norms for K-12 classrooms. Welcome, Shana.
Gwinnett County Public Schools, which is the largest district, of course, in Georgia. I started out actually as a PE and health teacher and self-taught myself computer science. And I'm one of two teachers that have ever been certified to teach computer science and PE and health in the state of Georgia. So I'm kind of a unicorn in that sense. So it's really easy for me to encourage non-CS teachers to engage with this work because I was a non-CS teacher and then eventually became one. I'm excited to be here and excited to talk to you a little bit about our work at Kapor, as well as our Responsible AI Guide. So Kapor is located in Oakland, California. We literally sit at the intersection of racial justice and tech. So we are standing 10 toes down, even with the new current administration in the president seat, is that we still are not going to be unwavering from that commitment to make sure that we understand that society is inequitable. There are racial injustices as well as other injustices as far as gender, LGBTQ rights, ableism, those types of things. But we're going to stand 10 toes down as far as racial justice and tech. And so part of my work and the bulk of my work is all related to K-12 computer science equity, helping schools, helping districts understand what implementation of computer science is. And now, after writing the Responsible AI Guide, now helping them understand what is really truly AI literacy. That includes understanding how these tools can actually hurt, harm, and how you can mitigate some of those harms for yourself and for your communities. So I wanted to start with a couple just warm-up prompting questions. You can feel free to come off mute if you want to, or you can type them in the chat. I'm a major introvert, so I'm all for people just typing in the chat. So what are kind of the first few words that come to mind when you hear artificial intelligence? Do you think of AI as another ed tech tool? Why and why not? And then what things does the tech industry get wrong or get right about K-12 education? And like I said before, feel free to come off mute or type your answers to any of these questions in the chat. Oops.
We've got an answer in that we got an answer to question 3. Yeah, it looks like we're getting some answers in the chat. So
I'm seeing overhyped, poorly understood by many. Question 3, that it's cheating to use AI in school. Okay. Do we consider AI an ed tech tool? Why or why not? Okay, ed tech is defined by Mary as saturated, ineffective, and bloated products. Jay French says, I want it to be an ed tech tool because it can't be avoided and AI is not new. Yep, it's been around since the 60s. Which I always told my students that was before I was born because they'd always call me old. But I would say, hey, AI's been around longer than I've been alive. So Shelley said it can help the learner and the educator. When we think of ed tech tools, as somebody mentioned before, do we think of things that have the teacher in mind, have the student in mind? A lot of times, and I'm having these discussions online and with certain colleagues, I feel like a lot of things that we do in K-12 education has always been kind of top down, and not situating ourselves in the place of a student, learner, and teacher, and working from bottom up in kind of our educational hierarchy. And so I'm wondering for the tech industry, what are they not understanding about K-12 education? I think there's lots of things, but it seems like we still are dealing with a completely inequitable education system. And tech keeps saying we're gonna, create this new tool, or we're gonna throw some money at this, or create these charter schools, or whatever the case may be. And still the needle has not been moved as far as equitable outcomes for all students in our schools. And so there's something that they're getting wrong. And I always like to ask educators to kind of amplify what they feel they're getting wrong, because luckily in my position at Kapor, I get to talk to a lot of these tech people. I'm actually meeting with Google a little bit later today to just tell them, like, yeah, this doesn't work in schools. Like, it might work for Google, and because y'all think schools are businesses, but we work with human beings. And so this stuff doesn't work unless you've actually like talked to a teacher and a student, talked to a parent or caregiver to make sure that something is going to work successfully in schools. And it might not also be able to scale. That's the other thing that a lot of, I think, tech industry gets wrong. They want to scale everything immediately rather than worrying about the impact. And sometimes impact is small. You have had times, for those of us who have been in a classroom, our impact is maybe that one student and that light bulb moment finally happening. But that impact is so much more valuable than sitting there and thinking about, oh, every student is doing X, Y, and Z. So we have to understand that our impact's a little bit different since we're working with kids. I see number one, somebody said monitor students for overuse. Um, EdTech tool can assist the classroom if used creatively. Yeah, I think it can assist, especially when we talk about emerging English language learning students, to kind of close some of those gaps so that they can actually participate in learning the content, and they're not behind because of the English necessarily deficiency, but the English like a learning gap. And then also for students with disabilities, a lot of students with disabilities already use EdTech tools and assistive technology in the classroom, but how can some of those ed tech tools be modified to support more students with disabilities? Especially for me, I taught in middle school, so computer science was an elective or connections class. So I got every student, same thing like I did with PE. So I would get all ability levels. I would get all like, for us, they call it ESOL students, but like all English language learning levels. So like level one, where they literally know no English, to like level four, where they're pretty fluent in English. And being able to do that is like really important, to use those tools and leverage them to save teachers time to be able to differentiate, make modifications, accommodations for students' material so they can still engage in the learning process, because a lot of times what tends to happen is that teachers don't have the time to do that. And so those kids get left further and further behind because they're not engaging in the learning and the content in the classroom. Jeremy said, the problem is teachers want to make it a learning thinking tool, but the students want it to be an automation tool. I completely agree. That's a very good answer. All right. And then Mary said, I'm very critical of claims that an ed tech product, including AI, can fix systemic societal problems. Yeah, it can't. Technology can't fix things. It would have done it by now. As advanced as our AI is, it would have fixed things, and it hasn't done it by now. It's actually, in a lot of cases, exacerbated and made it worse. All right. I love using AI to create alt text for images. Yes, accessibility is a huge, like, great thing to use AI for. But of course, you're not hopefully gonna like use it for alt text of, Taylor Swift doing a video as we did in the last session going forward. All right, so as somebody mentioned in the chat, and as I mentioned before, understand artificial intelligence has been around since the 1960s, but it has been literally proliferated and thrown everywhere. And our educational system has not been immune to the fact that understanding our society, unfortunately, is driven by the tech industry and not the other way around. And so we tend to go onto trends. The idea, as you'll see on a slide a little bit later, I feel like right now in education, we're at a point where it's a FOMO moment. People have a fear of missing out on this AI trend. And I promise it does not matter. Like, it's not a FOMO moment. Please understand that good teaching and learning happened before AI. It will continue to happen with maybe the assistance of AI, and it can happen without the assistance of AI. We always support researchers that have always brought up kind of the concerns related to AI. Dr. Tanika Brew, who was at Google, highlighted in her paper about the biases that AI continues to either hallucinate or bring up through searches, through those large language models and their data processing, and understanding that that is going to mitigate and also create harms for some of our marginalized students groups, because we are serving students, of course, that are coming from different identity markers. So we have students that are coming, from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different racial and ethnic backgrounds, gender backgrounds, maybe disability. And so we have to understand that these biases that are built into these AI systems are literally exacerbating the biases that these marginalized groups face on a daily basis. And then the AI landscape, the part that's actually really kind of, it's a lot of money. And as I tell people all the time, like, all money is not good money. I told my students this when I was teaching in class, but also just understand that capital is what's driving this. And I think also the other big thing that is driving this, especially in the education space, is access to student data. That's kind of like the last frontier. They have access to most of our data because we all carry around smartphones now. So some company has access to our data, whether it be Google, Amazon, etc. But student data has laws that can't be breached. And these tech companies see that as kind of the final frontier of how can we access student data? Let's give them these AI tools, or let's give them these ed tech tools to access their data, because data is money. Understand, AI does not work without data. And so data is money for these companies. And if these companies, as evidenced by this slide, are driven by a lot of capital, they see dollar signs behind student data rather than actual human beings behind student data. And then here's some of the challenges of AI. A lot of them have been talked about today. Our recent presidential election and the deep fakes, misinformation, disinformation, the environmental issues that we're having with AI that people are not even comprehending. That one just simple chat GPT search literally wasted an entire bottle of water. 16 ounces of water, that's a lot of water to waste to find out if Taylor Swift has married Travis Kelce by now, or whatever you're looking up on ChatGPT. I've seen lots of different things that people are looking up on those things, but understand these are kind of the challenges and risk. Also, automation of jobs. People are worried that some jobs are going to be taken away. I always stress upon with teachers that teaching can never be taken away, because, as I mentioned before, a robot cannot work with another human being and be successful with a variety of 30, 35. In my case, sometimes I'd have 40 in a classroom. There's no way that a robot or an AI assistant would be able to meet all of those students' needs. That requires a human touch and humanizing education that will never, ever be able to be replicated by computers or technology. And then, as I mentioned before, unfortunately, the executive order on the left just got rescinded by our current president, but we did have an executive order under Biden to start putting into place some kind of guidance as far as AI and some guardrails. I would say Europe is way ahead of us as far as guardrails for AI tools and technology. I saw somebody mention in the chat during the keynote speaker, in Australia, they've banned social media for kids under the age of 16. So there's a lot of other countries that are being proactive proactive with tech, but we are kind of a country, of course, we talk about freedom here in America, but we're not necessarily being proactive to protect people from these things. And then, as I mentioned before, the kind of FOMO, fear of missing out on this new generative AI train or this AI train, has got lots of companies pouring in dollars and lots of money to these startup companies to create this thing. And I said the big thing is to access that student data. That's a lot of times what the reason is that these companies are wanting to get into schools. As I mentioned before, at Kapor, we sit at the intersection of racial justice and tech. We believe AI technologies and technology in general are at the center of our fight for racial and social justice. These are just some headlines that are going on the top left picture. Dr. Joy Bulawami, for those who've never seen her movie Coded Bias, was talking about her PhD paper and how it did not recognize her face because of the melanin in her skin was too dark, and that she had to use a white mask in order to be recognized by facial recognition systems. How medical algorithms are affecting people of color in hospitals. There was things during the beginning of the COVID pandemic that some of the machines were unaccurately assessing the respiratory rates of Black people and Latina people comparative to white people. And so they were saying that, oh, you don't have COVID because your respiratory rate is, X, Y, and Z. And it was because of the faulty machines that have, of course, been programmed by people that have biases. And then you have lots of people that are being falsely impersonated and accused by the criminal justice system because of algorithms. Also, some of those algorithms are helping to refuse people assistance to get home loans, those types of things. So understand that technology right now is exacerbating a lot of the inequities and the social justice issues in our countries and not necessarily helping them. And then this is just, again, some more of the challenges: voter misinformation and disinformation, worker displacement, and then, as I mentioned before, the environmental impacts. And then as it relates to education, mental health, which is the purpose of this entire day of PD, to talk about social emotional learning, the student privacy piece that a lot of people are always kind of brushing under the rug as it talks to ed tech tools and using AI, and then academic integrity, as somebody mentioned in the chat before, students using AI for cheating, those types of things. They've built AI bots that can pass the bar. How is that going to impact, people that want to become lawyers? And what is AI doing to basically make shortcuts to learning? The big thing that I mentioned to everybody when I do these talks is that teaching and learning, it cannot be replaced by AI, and AI is a tool that takes away. There's been a study about taking away some of the cognitive load with its usage, and we have to understand in classrooms, our jobs are to make sure that we equip kids to be able to think and critically read and take in information and to be able to process that information without the help of computers doing it for them. So that brain power work that a lot of times we want to skimp out on and not necessarily have the time to do because our schools are inundated with stupid testing companies trying to make money off of us, is making sure that we really just implore our teachers when we're in schools to focus on how do I make sure that I'm helping my students develop their cognitive load so that they are doing the critical thinking and not relying on AI or any technology to do the critical thinking for them. These are some of the concerns about educators in AI, and this is from Forbes. 65% are concerned about plagiarism with student work. 62% are concerned about reduced human interaction, and then 42% are concerned about data privacy. And then one of my big questions that I still wrestle with is AI's challenges to equity. Is AI equitable? My first inclination is no, because it exacerbates a lot of the negative isms that exist in our country. But again, how can we sit there and frame something like an ed tech tool, which is what AI is, as something that can be used to basically help end inequality in our school? But as we see, it's going to challenge these things because it is built on a premise that is foundational, that has kind of centered in biases and negative isms like racism, sexism, ableism, that are going to impact these systems when they are put in front of our students and kids. So speaking of, is AI equitable? Do you believe AI in K-12 education is ethical? It can be a yes or no answer, or you can say thumbs up, thumbs down. Do you think AI in K-12 education, so not specifically just generative AI, just AI in K-12 education, is ethical? I know it's a loaded question. Good grief. My mouse is wanting to go fast. Anybody think AI is ethical in education? Okay, so Candace meant it can be used ethically, but it isn't on its own, depending on the context. Do you want to elaborate, Mary, if you could? Sorry. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, you're good. You're good. I mean, I would ask that question about any major decision. I'm going to go real broad here. I would ask that question about any major decision that affects the classroom. Is it ethical?
Yeah.
And it's going to really depend heavily on the context. I think in the way, if I look at my teaching career and how emerging technologies came about within those years, I don't think the majority of it was done well and therefore probably not ethical, but but it's because, as you pointed out, I think education in the US, as well as most things in the US, is largely reactive and not proactive. So I don't think as a culture, and I'm again speaking incredibly broadly, and I'm not speaking in different people groups, but I don't think as a culture we consider ethics or value them as a whole. So if we're not even having those as the forefront of different priorities in decision making, then I probably not. But I think it also depends on the context. If I'm looking at the different examples you guys have put up, and I used some of those in my own practice as well, of differentiation, of being able to reach English language learners, of being able to make visual descriptions accessible for people with visual impairment, you know, I, I think those are beautiful things. And but I got nothing for like ethical. I mean, obviously that's ethical, right?
Right.
But it's going to depend on the context, like everything. And it's going to depend on the application. But on the whole, no, none of it is. Not in the way
Uh,
that it has been developed and not in the way that it is being applied, I think, on in bigger context. Which is why I'm so glad that things like the Friday Institute are even looking into these things.
Yeah, I think that that's key. Like you said, it does depend on the context. I think also, unfortunately, we conflate ethical and moral as the same thing. And I'm going to go on the next couple slides to kind of give a little bit of the difference. Because as you mentioned before, we can think about this even more broadly as far as our political landscape. Like somebody could morally think that something is wrong, hypothetically, but it might not be ethically wrong, right? I always go with the premise, and this is how I'm thinking about is it being ethical? And that's why I actually honed on our guide being called the responsible AI guide instead of the ethical AI guide, because I feel like for something to be ethical, especially when we're talking about an education, it has to have three things be answered the same. So first, it can't do harm to me as an individual. So does this do harm to me? Kind of going back to the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. But I've taken that and expanded it to just AI in education. Does it do harm to the individual? Does it do harm to a group of people? And so when I have that context when talking with students and with teachers, I'm not talking about necessarily always just maybe the biased answers or the hallucinations you get, but think about some of the people that are in other countries that are having to clean this data so that what you get when you put your prompt in does not come out racist, biased, sexist, all of those things. There are people that are working for $5 an hour in Kenya and India that are cleaning these large language models so that the data that you get on the end or the output of your prompt does not have some of that nastiness to it that a lot of these AI systems are going to naturally produce without people going back and cleaning them. So it's do no harm to myself as an individual, and then do no harm to other people. And then the last one is do no harm to the environment. And as I've mentioned before, AI always does a harm to the environment. So if I can't answer this, it does no harm to me, it does no harm to other people, and it does no harm to the environment, it's not ethical to me, especially not in K-12 education, because as I always mention, we work with human beings. I would like to always preface people saying, how do we teach kids to use this responsibly? Because they can't avoid it, but them engaging with it is going to impact some sort of ethics or something societal that will impact us. So it's either going to impact the environment, it's going to impact the people that are cleaning these large language models and the data, or it might impact them. They might receive an output from their prompt that is damaging for them. We had the story recently of a kid who started chatting with a chatbot and ended up dying by suicide. So that was something that is harmful to them. And so I go with the premise that AI in education, because we work with human beings and we also work with minors, is that it is not ethical, but we can teach them responsible. And so I want to just give you the big gauge between ethics and morals. Understand morals are personal principles that I have, whereas ethics is kind of a global thing. So as you mentioned before, Mary, about the context, there are certain things that we have context about in general. We don't walk around and say, oh, my job every day is to harm other people. That shouldn't be what is driving us. Every day, everybody should be waking up in the morning to say, I'm going to at minimum not harm myself and I'm not going to harm other people. Like that's like the baseline level of like being a good human being. And so that to me is an ethical kind of thought to say, I don't want to do harm to myself and I don't want to do harm to others. Whereas my morals or principles are going to be a little bit more specific to say, well, what does that harm actually mean? Is it my words? Is it my actions? Those types of things. You might think saying something is morally wrong, whereas I might say that behavior is morally wrong, if that makes sense. So I try to preface with teachers and with students that morals are that personal thing that kind of guides us, that like angel and devil on your shoulders that you maybe have seen in cartoons, where ethics is thinking generally and broadly in society, how are we making sure that everybody is having a livable experience in life? What are kind of the principles that are guiding us to all have a livable experience? Now, that livable experience is going to vary based on lots of different things, but we want the experience to be livable for everybody. Here's just another graphic that I think are just really great. Habits and behaviors, like I said before, the angel and devil for morals, and then it's just societal norms with respects to the larger group. And so for me, I think of ethics as far as humankind, because there is nuance between cultures, not only racially and ethnically, gender-wise, the LGBT community, disability community. And so ethics to me, if I go broadly and say, I'm not going to do any harm to anybody, that to me is a premise that I could live by. Because ultimately, I'm not going to do harm to myself. And if I care about human beings, I'm not going to do harm to them as well. So I wrote, godly, it took me about 7 months to write the Responsible AI and Tech Justice Guide, because I felt like there was nobody in education that was talking more about tech justice and how to use these tools responsibly and to critically interrogate them. And so this guide was written and released last January, and it's been out for a while. This is just the purpose and rationale. We know that the AI landscape is evolving very, very rapidly. And we know that I would say our country has not done a very good job of putting guardrails in place. And so I wanted to provide some guidance, at least in the K-12 arena, to help people minimize the risk and mitigate harm. We understand that people have been doing the research and the scholarship examining ethical and equitable concerns about AI technologies, but we wanted to kind of put our foot in the ground to say that there needs to be a way that we clearly articulate what is the purpose of AI in education. A lot of times you'll hear from a lot of people saying, oh, well, we have to prepare kids for the future jobs and da 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 da. And we have to understand that the purpose of schooling is, even though unfortunately our system was built this way, is not necessarily to just prepare kids to go to work. We want to prepare them to be good human beings, and that requires critical reading skills. We want them to be able to think critically, to problem solve, to collaborate. And so, how are we looking at AI as a way to help us teach those things, not necessarily just prepare kids for the workforce? And then we wanted to just create this kind of bold new vision that considers racial justice in what we're doing, similar to what we've done before at the Kapor Foundation, but we wanted to bring that to the AI and education space. So what this thing includes is kind of a need of guidance. We defined what responsible AI and tech justice is. I came up with 6 core components of what that actually means. And then I also came up with interrogation questions, questions that go underneath each of these core components that teachers can use as prompts for students to say, how can I dig deeper into this core component to maybe understand it better, and understand how this possibly can impact me, impact my community, impact society as a whole. And then we've also given some resources, a couple of lessons and case studies about responsible AI and tech justice as well. I always like to acknowledge our senior advisory board, and our working advisory board who helped me create this. They were the ones that would go back and say, oh, you shouldn't say this, or let's say this and that, let's say that. A lot of really important big name people, not only in the CS education community, but also in higher ed and in industry that work at the intersection of racial justice and tech, or ethical considerations as far as tech and tech justice. So here's a definition. I'm going to let you read it on your own, and then I'd love to hear what things stick out to you in the definition. Any words or parts stick out to you in the definition of what we're defining as responsible AI and tech justice? Challenging and disrupting. Thank you, Candace. I
I'll tell
think
you,
the other
the
thing that,
critically
oh, go ahead.
interrogate those
Yes.
that popped out at me.
Yes. Yeah. And I specifically wanted that to be there. You might have heard from other people in the CS space, which is frustrating because they didn't cite me, but the idea of creating critical consumers of these technologies, that's what we want to create in our students, is that they critically consume these technologies, not just consume, but they're critically thinking about how these technologies are impacting them, how they work, those types of things. Yeah, so the critically interrogate is really important because I think that it goes back to that thing that I mentioned before. We want kids to develop those critical thinking skills, and part of that is for them to question what's put in front of them, not just take it at face value.
I think when I'm looking at, yeah, thank you. Sorry, that's beautiful. I'm looking at can you hear me? I'm frozen on my screen. There it
Yeah,
goes. Okay.
I hear you. Yeah.
I'm looking at this and seeing that this course of study is not only trying to teach those critical analysis skills, but also to teach action skills. And
Mhm.
that's beautiful because I think you have to, in something that is as rapidly changing as the AI landscape and everything that it's affecting, you have to be able to do both
Right.
of those things.
Mhm.
And I think that's what those two chunks are saying, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's amazing
Yeah,
to
and
be
I
able to do
think
both of those things from the lens
absolutely.
that you're from the lens too that you're looking at, and that's doing going back to your ethics explanation. Thank you for clarifying for me. Especially you had that already locked and loaded, so that's good. It wasn't just for me, but sorry, I'm not trying to center myself, but I was like, oh, good. I needed a refresher. But to be able to do it from the racial and social justice lens, I
Mhm.
think is is incredibly helpful and incredibly effective, and it is doing the opposite of harm. It's helping, right?
Right.
That's a somebody said it's a hefty sentence. It's a gorgeous sentence.
Yeah, I think the other thing just to think about, I know in the CS education community, we're big on we don't want kids just to consume technology. We want them to be producers of the technology they're doing. But I think when we have them critically interrogate and then hopefully become ethical producers of these technologies, do they realize why am I creating this tool? Because right now, a lot of people are just creating tools just to create them because they have capital, resources, etc. And so we want kids to sit there and say, what is the need for this tool? Like, how is this going to make my community's life better? How is this going to make other people's life better? Maybe a marginalized group. How is this going to improve so that everyone, again, like I said, has a livable life? How is this technology going to do that? And so when we're having kids produce these technologies, we want them to consider those things so that they are thinking about alt text when they're producing something that's image based. Like it's a forefront thought in their mind, not an afterthought. And I think when you're having them critically interrogate these technologies, they get to see the gaps in what these technologies have, but then also thinking about, well, hey, I want to produce something that's better than this. These are the changes I would make. And they're not able to do that unless they're able to interrogate it to start off with. So I'm going to go through the core components. I'm not going to read them aloud. I'm just going to read the first little part. First, we wanted them to examine the AI technology creation system. So who's designing these tools? Why are they designing all those types of questions? I have some prompting questions that guided me when I was writing this guide as far as the things that I wanted always students and teachers to consider. The second one is we want people to interrogate the complex relationship between human beings and computers and technology. The third, we want people to explore the impacts and implications of AI technologies on society. So we don't want to necessarily be all gloom and doom. I would say that I am a very gloom and doom person as far as AI is concerned, but there are some benefits to these things. But we also want to make sure that we're seeing both in an even light, not just pontificating all the positives of how AI is going to revolutionize education and not necessarily looking at some of those negative consequences of it as well. The fourth core component is we want people, and this is also for teachers, we want the people that are working in buildings with students to interrogate their personal uses of AI. Why are you using AI? Like, what is the end goal here that we're trying to do? Again, like I said, we want them to be critical consumers just like the students so that they can address misuse. Because if I'm sitting there and I'm justifying why I'm using AI in a classroom, it's a lot easier for me to explain why I don't want students to use AI on certain tasks in my class. It's easier for me to develop maybe classroom policies around generative AI use if I sit there and I am very transparent as far as what do I utilize AI for. Students, even though I mentioned before, they sometimes, in classrooms want to clown their teachers or whatever, they do believe what you say and they listen inherently to what you say. Especially for me, I found that on the middle school level. And so when I explained why I did things, it made them sit there and say, okay, well, she's given me a reason. And it makes them start to think about, well, why am I doing certain things? And that's kind of what we want to build capacity in our students to do, even though we know when they are in our graces through K12, their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. We want to get them in the habit of asking themselves, why am I doing this? Why am I engaging with this tool? Why am I engaging in this habit? Whatever the case may be. Number five is dealing with data. So making sure that people are critically understanding how data is used, how it's analyzed, how it's interpreted, how it's reported, because we know that data is what makes AI run. Without data, there is no AI. So we have to understand and let kids know that what is being pulled into those AI systems, who's interpreting it, who's analyzing it, is all going to impact what that output that comes out of that AI system that you use. And then the very last core component is we want to teach them to be proactive in mitigating the harms, not only for themselves, and their individual usage for these AI tools, but also helping them understand how can they protect their communities. We have lots of communities, especially in Atlanta. We're the most surveilled city in the entire country. So we have literally cameras almost everywhere in Atlanta. How can we teach kids to protect themselves from these surveillance technologies that usually miss or miss basically say that Black and Latina people are doing stuff wrong or saying that these people are already in the criminal justice system, whatever the case may be. We want to teach communities and kids how to also not only stop the harms to themselves, but how they can actually support their communities as well. So these are the questions what were kind of driving when I wrote this, and this is the thing that I always kept in mind. And I think these questions are very easy to share with students because they're very simplistic. But to think about who's creating the technologies, it's usually a white, cis, heterosexual man. So what does that mean as far as things are concerned? In my class, we talked about how identity impacts not only your lived experience, but what you tend to do as far as you are behavior wise. So if we have white, his set heterosexual men creating these technologies, what identities or what parts of their identities are going to be reflected in the technologies that they are creating? What identities are not going to be reflected in those technologies? What are they motivated by? As I mentioned a few slides before, most of them are motivated by money or they're motivated by access to data they don't have access to. But understanding when I'm creating these things, even if we want our kids to be producers, what am I motivated creating this tool for? Is it going to help or is it possibly going to hurt or harm people? Who benefits from the creations? So as we see, because of the inequity in society, somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose. Who's going to benefit from the creation of these things? Who's harmed? Who's prepared to create these future innovations, and then who is left behind. This was kind of my centering thought of questions to help me write the guide, but they're very easy contextual questions to investigate with kids. When I'm looking at this technology tool that I'm using, ask myself these things and look forward. This is just showing a general breakdown of some of the core components and specific things, and I put some of the interrogation questions on there. So this is examining the AI technology creation system, and you'll have access to these slides so you can look at them on your own. Here's some of the interrogation questions for interrogate your personal use. How do algorithms impact information in your social media feeds? How are marginalized groups impacted by mis and disinformation? So that would fall underneath that core component number 4. Here is the version of the guide. As I mentioned before, I'll make sure that they give y'all the slide deck. All of our stuff at Kapor, because I was a teacher, is always going to be free. We will never charge y'all for anything. So this guide, it's 26 pages long, but we also have an executive summary that's 6. Both of those are accessible on our website. The PDF links are here, and I'll also put them in the chat so that you can have access to them later.
I can go ahead and
And
do
then
that.
okay, perfect. And then the last thing I want to talk about is a tool that I created with the help of some current teachers. I have a lot of teachers that I'm friends with that do not teach CS. And so they did not know how to tackle this generative AI kind of hurdle in classrooms. And so I created just a starting point for a tool to help them kind of create their classroom policies as it relates to generative AI. Y'all are full aware what generative AI is. There, of course, are lots of concerns with its ethics and criticality because a lot of the stuff that generative AI produces is stolen from other people. I tell people all the time to treat AI and generative AI as another ed tech tool, and it's not a substitution for teaching and learning. A lot of classroom teachers, especially those that are not in the computer science space, don't really understand explicitly what this means. And they have a lot of concerns, especially for the academic integrity of their classes. Or, for example, a lot of my friends that are ELA teachers, they're concerned about kids writing using AI and not developing their own writing skills moving forward. So here's just a little like general overview, and this is also available on our website. I created a PDF and I also created a Google spreadsheet so that you can modify it for your classroom. But basically, I gave a bunch of roles of what Gen AI can do for a student on a task. So I wanted to create this so that basically not only that kids are informed, but teachers are informed of what Gen AI is out there and what it can actually do to help me create a task for maybe an assignment for the class. So it tells you the role, it tells you what that role is, it gives you a sample prompt that you would actually put in the AI tool, and then I give them a list of actual generative AI tools that can help accommodate that. What we then do with this is that we let teachers and students decide kind of like a point system to say, Okay, for certain assignments, I'm going to let you use like 2 points worth of generative AI. So it gives students still agency to engage with these tools. Of course, we're hopefully having those conversations about them doing it responsibly. But then there's certain assignments I'm not going to let you use AI. So depending on the weight of the AI tool is going to develop basically the amount of that the kids can use it. So something like co-author, where you're having something completely help you write something, that would be weighted like 5 or 6 points. Whereas something like a bibliography builder might only be weighted 1 point. So certain assignments you might say, I don't want you to do more than 2 points worth of generative AI. So this way it still lets kids engage with the AI tools, but they're not so reliant on it. And then at the end, they have to explain what AI tools they use, what environmental impacts of the AI tool. So how long they spent on the AI tool, how it's impacted the environment, were there any hallucinations that came up? So they're starting to think critically about, is it worth it me engaging this AI tool? So it's a whole robust kind of tool for teachers to use in their classroom with students that don't know how to approach generative AI, but they want to co-create kind of the norms for what they want their students to exist in using Gen AI tools in the classroom. This is on our CS equity page. If you do kporfoundation.org resources, underneath classroom instructional strategies, you'll see the AI norms classroom tool. And like I said, it's editable. So there's a PDF version and then there's also a Google Sheets version, because I know that teachers want stuff that they can actually make their own in their classroom. So you might have other ideas of things that you want to do or add to it that you're more than welcome to. I just gave a blank kind of template as far as a guide to start with, as far as using this tool. So this is just really, really, to me, part of the implementation of our responsible AI guide. We're going to be doing lots more things, but this is the first thing that we release, which is basically helping teachers in classrooms that maybe are not well versed on CS to co-create generative AI policies with their students. All right, and so I'll open it up for, I think I'm at the end, but I think I have maybe 2 minutes for questions.
Yeah, we got a couple minutes for questions if
Okay.
anybody's got some. So I want to say thank you though, because I think this has been great. But yeah, what questions do you all have?
And feel free, if you don't get, I think you should have to get the slides, but if you don't, send an email here and I'll send them to you.